The night Chicago shut down, I remember thinking how strange it was that everything important in my life seemed to happen when I was stuck between places. Not home, not gone, just grounded. The kind of night where the snow came down so heavy it swallowed sound, where the airport lights blurred into a single white glow, and where I had no idea that a missed flight was about to give me the one thing I had stopped believing in: timing, second chances, and a man who would quietly change the way winter felt forever. Before we continue, drop your city and time in the comments, and thanks for listening to my story. Now back to the story. I'm Lena Parker, and 2 days before Christmas, O'Hare Airport decided I wasn't going anywhere. The departure board flipped from delayed to canceled with a finality that felt personal. Snowstorm warnings echoed through the terminal, that calm Midwestern voice telling everyone to stay put, stay safe, stay patient. I stood there with my coat half zipped, my phone buzzing with messages from my mom back in Indiana, all of them saying the same thing in different ways. We'll wait. Drive safe. We miss you. I stared at the screen longer than necessary before sliding it back into my pocket. 32 years old, divorced, living alone in a studio apartment in Logan Square that still smelled faintly like the man who left. I told myself I was fine. I told myself timing was a myth people used to excuse disappointment. That night, I just wanted coffee and silence. The diner sat a few blocks from the airport, one of those old Chicago places that had survived decades of weather and heartbreak. Neon sign flickering, vinyl booths cracked with age, a bell over the door that rang like it had something to say. Inside, the place was nearly empty. A waitress with tired eyes wiped the counter like it was muscle memory. 2 truckers hunched over plates of eggs, and one man sitting alone near the window, dark jacket still dusted with snow, hands wrapped around a mug like it was keeping him upright. I slid into a booth across the room, shrugging out of my coat. The heat hit my face, thawing something deeper than cold fingers. Coffee arrived without ceremony, black, strong, honest. I took the first sip and felt my shoulders drop for the first time that day. I noticed him without meaning to, not because he was loud or confident or trying to be seen, because he wasn't. He had the posture of someone used to waiting, broad shoulders, tired eyes, a calm that felt earned. Every so often, he glanced at the window where snow erased the world beyond the glass. There was something familiar in that look, like he'd made peace with disappointment long before tonight. The bell over the door rang again as another gust of wind pushed someone inside, and he flinched slightly before settling back into stillness. That tiny reaction stuck with me. I didn't know why yet. When the waitress came back to refill my cup, she sighed the way people do when weather wins. "Looks like we're all spending Christmas here," she said, not unkindly. I nodded. "Seems that way." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. From across the room, the man lifted his mug in a small, almost apologetic toast, like he was acknowledging a shared sentence. I returned the gesture without smiling. It felt like enough. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time behaves differently in snowstorms. Eventually, the truckers paid and left, boots crunching loudly against the silence they left behind. The diner felt smaller then, more intimate. The man stood to leave, hesitated, then glanced toward my booth. He walked over slowly, careful, like he didn't want to intrude. "Mind if I sit for a minute?" he said, voice low and even. No flights, no rush. I gestured to the seat across from me. "Go ahead." He slid in, setting his mug down between us. Up close, I could see faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the kind that came from more than smiling. "Ethan," he said. "Lena." The names hung there, simple and complete. Conversation came easily, which surprised me, about the storm, about Chicago winters that didn't care about plans, about bad airport coffee versus diner coffee, which he defended fiercely. He worked as a paramedic, pulling overtime because holidays were always busy. I told him about my canceled flight, my parents waiting with too much food and not enough patience. We laughed softly, the kind of laughter that doesn't demand anything back. There was no flirting, no expectation, just two people sharing warmth while the world froze outside. At some point, the waitress dropped off a slice of pie between us without asking. "On the house," she said. "Christmas spirit." Ethan thanked her. I noticed the way he always thanked people, like he meant it, like he knew how fragile kindness could be. When the diner finally announced it was closing early, neither of us rushed to leave. Outside, the snow had softened into something almost beautiful, blanketing the streets in quiet white. Streetlights cast halos that felt unreal, like a movie set. Ethan pulled on his gloves. "I'm walking," he said. "So am I." We stepped into the cold together, the doorbell ringing us out into the night. Chicago felt different then, muted, intimate. The city that never stopped had taken a breath. Our boots crunched in sync as we walked, hands shoved deep into pockets, breath visible between words. He told me about growing up on the South Side, about learning early how to stay steady when things went wrong. I told him about my divorce without drama, without bitterness, just facts. He listened without interrupting, without trying to fix anything. That alone felt rare. We stopped at a corner where our paths would split. The moment stretched, heavy with something unspoken. "Well," he said, offering a small smile. "Guess this is good night." I nodded. "Guess so." Neither of us moved. Snow fell between us, slow and deliberate, like it had all the time in the world. "Same diner tomorrow?" he said finally. "If the city's still stuck." I didn't hesitate. "I'll be there." He nodded once, like he'd already known. That night, back in my apartment, I lay awake listening to the wind scrape against the windows. I thought about his quiet presence, the way conversation hadn't felt like effort. I told myself not to read into it. Delays were temporary, so were connections made in them. Still, I set my alarm earlier than usual. The next morning, Chicago woke buried, cars half lost under snowdrifts, sidewalks untouched, pristine. I walked to the diner with my scarf pulled high, heart beating faster than it had any right to. He was already there, sitting in the same booth, same calm posture. He looked up when I walked in, and something in his expression shifted. Relief, maybe, or recognition. "Morning, Lena." "Morning, Ethan." Coffee appeared like magic, and just like that, the day began. We talked longer this time, about loss, carefully, like handling glass. He told me about his fiancée, a winter accident years ago, black ice, one moment, gone. He didn't dramatize it, didn't need to. The weight of it sat in every word he didn't say. I felt my chest tighten, not with pity, but understanding. Different stories, same ache. After breakfast, we walked again, through neighborhoods dusted in white, past closed shops and glowing windows. The city felt like it belonged only to us. We stood on a bridge watching the river crawl beneath sheets of ice. Ethan leaned on the railing, eyes distant. "Winter does that," he said quietly. "Makes you remember what you lost." I nodded. "And what you survived." He looked at me then. Really looked. Something passed between us, unspoken but undeniable. By the time Christmas Eve approached, the storm still hadn't let up. Flights remained grounded, roads barely passable. The city had claimed us. That night, Standing under a string of lights outside a closed bookstore, Ethan stopped walking. Snow settled in his hair. "Lena," he said, voice steady but soft. "I don't believe in accidents." Neither did I, but believing in what came next felt terrifying. The space between us felt charged, fragile, real, and for the first time in years, I felt the edge of something I'd sworn off. Hope. The snow kept falling. Christmas was hours away, and neither of us knew yet that the hardest part wasn't getting stuck. It was deciding whether to stay. By the time Christmas morning arrived, the city felt like it was holding its breath. Snow softened every edge, wrapped Chicago in a quiet that felt sacred, like the world had been asked to whisper for just one day. I woke up to pale light pushing through my curtains, my phone lighting up with missed calls from my parents and unread messages from friends who assumed I was already halfway home. I didn't answer right away, because for the first time in years, I wasn't sure where home was supposed to be, and because somewhere across the city, a man named Ethan Brooks was waking up too, carrying his own ghosts into a morning neither of us had planned for. We met at the diner again, like it had become a ritual written into the snow. The place was closed officially, but the waitress had unlocked the door anyway, waving us in like she already knew our story mattered. "Only coffee today," she said. "Merry Christmas." Ethan smiled at her, that quiet, grateful smile that always felt deeper than words. "Merry Christmas," he said back. We sat across from each other, steam rising from our mugs, silence settling comfortably between us. Not awkward, not empty, full. I noticed something different about him that morning, a tension beneath the calm, like he'd spent the night fighting with memories he couldn't outrun. "You okay?" I said, not asking, just offering space. He nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "Just one of those days." I understood immediately. Christmas had a way of reopening doors you'd nailed shut. After coffee, we walked without direction, letting the city decide for us. We passed a small church where candles flickered behind stained glass. A group of kids laughed somewhere unseen, their voices bright against the stillness. Ethan stopped near a park, snow untouched except for one narrow path. "This is where it happened," he said quietly. He didn't need to explain. I felt it in the way his shoulders tightened, the way his breath caught. We stood there together, the past heavy but not crushing. I didn't reach for him right away. I waited. When his hand found mine, it felt like permission. "I come here every winter," he said, "just to remind myself I made it through." I squeezed his hand, grounding both of us. "You did," I said, "and you're still here." The words weren't dramatic. They didn't need to be. They were true. Later, we ended up at my apartment, snow melting off our coats onto the floor. I hadn't invited anyone into that space since my divorce. It still held echoes of arguments and silence. Ethan took it in without judgment. "You've got good light," he said, looking at the window. I laughed softly. "First compliment this place has gotten." We sat on the couch, mugs warming our hands, shoulders brushing. The closeness felt electric and terrifying all at once. I could feel the edge of something shifting inside me, something I'd protected fiercely. We talked about our families, about mistakes we'd made and lessons we'd learned too late. I told him about the moment I realized my marriage was over, not in a fight, but in a quiet morning where love just wasn't there anymore. He listened like the story mattered, because to him, it did. When he spoke about his fiancée, his voice softened, grief woven with gratitude. "She taught me how to love," he said, "and losing her taught me how much it costs." I nodded, feeling the weight of that truth settle into my bones. The moment between us shifted slowly, naturally, no rush, no drama, just two people standing at the edge of something real. When he kissed me, it wasn't urgent or consuming. It was gentle, intentional, like he was asking, not taking. I kissed him back with a softness I didn't know I still had. Snow continued to fall outside, indifferent to the way my world was quietly rearranging itself. That afternoon, the city announced roads would start reopening by evening. Flights rescheduled, movement restored, reality knocking. Ethan stood by the window, hands in his pockets. "I should check in," he said. "Work might call." I nodded, my chest tightening. Of course they would. Of course life wouldn't pause forever. He left for his shift just before dusk, promising nothing, asking nothing. I watched him walk down the street, his figure disappearing into the snowfall. The apartment felt larger without him, quieter. I wondered if that was all it was meant to be. A beautiful delay, a moment between destinations. I told myself to be grateful and let go. Christmas night came wrapped in silence. I ate leftovers alone, FaceTimed my parents, laughed when expected. But my thoughts kept drifting back to the diner, the walks, the way Ethan's presence felt like warmth against winter. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. A single text. "You still awake?" My heart kicked hard against my ribs. "Yeah. Can I come by?" I didn't hesitate. "Please." He arrived with snow in his hair and exhaustion in his eyes. He didn't take off his coat right away. Just stood there, looking at me like he needed to say something important before courage ran out. "I'm bad at timing," he said quietly. "I always have been." I stepped closer. "So am I." The words hung between us, heavy with meaning. "I don't know what this is yet," he continued, "but I know I don't want it to end just because the roads reopened." My throat tightened. "I don't either." It felt like stepping off a ledge without knowing where you'd land. Terrifying. Necessary. We spent the night talking, really talking, about what came next. Not promises, not fantasies, just intention. We agreed to try. Slowly, honestly. With room for fear and hope to coexist. When morning came, the snow had finally stopped. Sunlight spilled across the city, bright and forgiving. Chicago exhaled. I drove him home later that day, the roads messy but passable. We didn't rush the goodbye, didn't cling, just stood there, hands intertwined. "This winter," he said, "almost didn't happen." I smiled softly. But it did. He kissed my forehead, then my lips, and stepped back. "See you soon, Lena." "See you soon, Ethan." My flight finally took off the next morning. As the plane lifted above the city, I looked down at the snow-covered grid, thinking about how close I'd come to missing everything that mattered. Life didn't always arrive on schedule. Sometimes it showed up disguised as inconvenience, as delay, as winter. Weeks later, back in Chicago for good, I walked into that same diner with a different kind of certainty. Ethan was already there, waiting. Some things, it turned out, were worth being grounded for, and some winters weren't meant to be escaped. They were meant to be lived through, together.